welcome to the Emotional Work Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the human condition. And this week I sit here interviewing my guest live and being a bit nervous, and I'll explain why about that in a minute. So I was asked or challenged a while ago by Fiona McBride, who goes by @FionaMcBride on Twitter, about the extent to which this podcast had addressed some kind of real fundamental questions. For example, things like, what are emotions? What is emotional intelligence? Is it even a thing? And I know that today's episode will address this and a lot more. Now, the reason I'm nervous is because today's guest I've known for over a decade, and our first meeting in a hotel next to East Midlands Airport, where I was interviewed by our guest, because he's been a mentor, a coach, an advisor, a client and a peer, and now we collaborate in areas that we love to work, and it's just a great honour to have him on the podcast today. So I think that's enough kind of impression management stuff for you for now. So let's get him on the podcast. So let's welcome this week's guest, which is Cliff Lansley. Hi, Cliff.
Hi, nice to see you again, Phil.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm very, very well, yeah. Looking forward to this, yeah.
Good. So as per usual with the podcast then, I'll open with a unexpected but innocuous question to help us and help the listeners get to know our guests a little bit more. So my innocuous yet unexpected question for you is, what surprised you most in the last week?
I've just had the luxury of spending a week in Romania with the intelligence services doing some behavioural analysis training. Whenever we go over there, we always do a little adventure. So we've been doing some off-road motorcycling.
Okay, I like you framed it as a little adventure and then into off-road motorcycling. But anyway, sorry, carry on. And
I'm 60 next year, and so I was lucky enough that we had part of the team there, but two of my younger sons who work in the business, they came along too, and I thought they were going to give me a run for the money, but they didn't. That's the surprise.
Okay. Yeah. So they didn't give you a run for your money?
No.
So you're still the top dog then?
Still top dog.
Still top dog.
Yeah.
So what surprised me most in the last week? So I think it's my hatred of chasing. So I'm in the process of buying a house, and I feel like I'm having to chase all of the time. I'm chasing solicitors, I'm chasing mortgage brokers, I'm chasing agents, I'm chasing everyone, and I just wish people would do their insert expletive job and help me buy the house. It feels like I'm just on everyone's back all the time, and I hadn't realised quite how much that annoys me. I guess because I don't have to do it all of the. So I think this is a particular context where being on top of,
absolutely,
repeatedly chasing is important. But God, it annoys this.
It's better than waiting, though.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
So you should feel a little bit in control if you're doing some poking and progress chasing.
Yeah. But it's just it's the amount of obstacles that are put in the way that don't need to be obstacles. That's the bit that frustrates me, and I know why, because that links into universal trigger for anger. But for me, the goal is just get me in the house, and whereas solicitors have boxes to tick and mortgage brokers have boxes to tick and people have boxes to tick, and I'm just like, get me in the house.
Gotcha. So are you surprised at the amount of that stuff, or your ability to cope with it?
Both. So I'm surprised at the amount of boxes there are to be ticked, and the extent to which it then annoys me when I have to just chase again and again and again and again and again. It just frustrates the living daylights out of me.
Okay, well, one of the top 3 stresses, moving house.
Indeed. What are the other 2?
Death of a close one and divorce, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, is none of them going on right now?
No, none of them going on right now. No, I have got.
Is Angela listening to this?
Yes. Sorry. All right. So. I guess we've talked about a lot of stuff in there then. So partly about the you being top dog still, and then on a motorcycle, yes. And then for me the kind of challenges or the stresses that come with moving house. So tangled up in all of that is lots of emotion based stuff. What's making me frustrated, what's making you feel top dog, and all of those things that go into that. So I wonder if we might kind of take a step back from all of that then and go, all right, well, what is or what are emotions then? I think that might be a good place for us to start.
Great starting point. Little question with many answers depending on who you speak to. So I don't think there is wide acceptance of a single definition of emotion. But what I think features in most definitions that get accepted and support from most is the fact that it's a process. So an emotion is a process. It happens to us. It's not something we choose. And it helps us to deal with matters of importance to our welfare without thinking. And that little cluster is important. So it's what matters to us because part of emotion and the way we react and respond to stimulus triggers is designed to either save our life, enrich our life, develop relationships, or to motivate action. And that's evolved. Some of that is evolved, so that our primates share the same emotions. And if we didn't have those, and we just relied on conscious thought, we probably wouldn't survive to be the 59 plus years that I've managed to make riding difficult motorbikes. So if I'm riding a motorcycle, we had a couple of incidents where vehicles and animals come onto the tracks. And thinking and training doesn't come into this. It's just an object coming into sight triggers a response of threat, and then the fear of harm from that it makes you move away from the object. And working out the vectors of the speed and the size of the animal or the vehicle coming from your peripheral vision, and working out whether you're going fast enough, slow enough to make that. All that happens in a flash. And so the swerve of the handlebars, the avoidance of the object, seems to be happening much of our time without thought. And sometimes that can get us into trouble. So emotions are designed to help us, but also they can get us into trouble because sometimes they don't serve pro-social behaviour.
Yes. And I know later we'll come on to that kind of distinction between pro-social and anti-social, because I think that's a really useful distinction to make. But one of the things you kind of mentioned in there was the fact that emotions happen to us; they're kind of unbidden in that way. No, I was tagged in a tweet by a lady called Jane Harrison last week, where she was sharing a piece of research that had been published by some authors saying that they'd shattered the narrative that emotion, especially the facial expression of emotion, isn't something that's innate. It's something that people will use to manipulate situations. So they will perform emotion as well as it kind of happening in an unbidden way. So way back in your original thing you said not everybody can agree. So does everybody agree that emotions are unbidden, or can they be performed as well?
There are some outlier researchers who try and challenge the widely accepted approach that the emotions happen to us. So most of those who have studied emotions for most of their career, and including, this is not just psychologists, this is the neuroscientists as well, agree that there's an automatic appraisal process that's going on below our consciousness even when we're asleep. And then if something is triggered, there's an affect program activation which sends out impulses. Those impulses are the first point at which we can sense something's going on. However, that recent research suggests that the emotion is used to manipulate the environment or others. That's true too, because first of all is the raw felt emotion, which is very hard to manage and interrupt because it happens in less than 500 milliseconds. So those impulses are, most people agree, Joe Ladoux, the neuroscientist, says you'll never remove the effect of a strong trigger of those impulses. You can weaken the effect. But most of his research is on rats, and it transfers to humans, is that you can't remove a trigger, especially a powerful one, once we have it, whether that's evolved or learned. So, but however, when you get to after 500 milliseconds, you then move into, is the way I'm going to behave right now appropriate for the context and the goals and the person I'm with, and or just for my thinking. So this, do I need to interrupt my thinking because this is destructive and negative for me, or is this leading to, can I see this manifesting itself into behaviour which is probably destructive for a relationship?
Okay.
And at that point we may choose to interrupt it. So there's an interrupt needed in some social situations where the natural play out of the emotion could be destructive.
Okay.
Like my grandmother giving me a piece of cake that's disgusting. She loves me, I love her. For me to show disgust and my true feelings as soon as that cake touches my tongue would be offensive and cruel.
Yeah.
So you have to try and mask that as much as you can, and sometimes you can't, so that you can portray maybe a false emotion for good reasons to the other person. So using it as a transmission tool to manipulate an environment is often done for good reasons. A poker player might want to do it for competitive reasons about the card they picked up. And and the face is a signalling tool. That's part of why the face, we believe, is wired up to what happens in that half a second. Is this long distance signalling tool that doesn't need words, and that can help a species or a group to stay together and perpetuate their species, and keep each other alert and aware. So it can be used to communicate it to others, and sometimes that might be used to manipulate or to guide someone else's behaviour for our own ends. Whatever the purpose or the goal is, that's for the individual. Yeah. But for emotions to be something that are chosen, that suggests cognition, and we know things are happening before conscious awareness happens that motivate and trigger behaviour and physiological responses. So the current research is perhaps right, but what their discussion is something that's way down the emotional timeline, 3/4 of a second down that timeline. The raw, real emotions, the basic emotional theory, is not counted by many, and that starts to happen at 300-400 milliseconds.
Yeah, and I think so we know that emotions can be performed because actors do it on stage all the time. You know, so we I think there's plenty of evidence that says yes, people can. When I say perform an emotion, so they can make either the visual or auditory cues that would suggest an emotion is being experienced. Now, whether that emotion is being experienced or not, that may or may not be the case depending on the individual. So there are certain, so I know that actors will get taught certain strategies to make their voice sound like they're sad, or will get taught certain strategies, whether that be through, you then look at something like memory recall as a strategy to recreate an emotional state. You might argue then actually what you're doing is you are feeling the emotion again, as opposed to just making the voice change so it sounds like you are something rather than actually being something.
Yeah. And this is Stanislavski technique is taught to many actors, and it works on those two sides. It's the memory recall. You don't need an event to trigger an emotion. It could be memory, it could be imagination, and then by going back in time to a sad moment can help you to create the sensations of sadness, which can make you perform a sad role effectively. I worry about the neuroses and psychoses issues. My youngest son is an actor, and that's the way he was being coached early on in his career, and that worried me a little bit in terms of replaying sad episodes in his life as a technique for bringing on an emotion, as well as remembering the script and performing. Right, yeah. It's too complicated. You can just do it with your physiology. So that's the technique he now uses. And it's the phrase "fake it till you feel it" is what I use with him. Is if you can fake and manipulate the right muscles and body and voice, as you mentioned earlier. Yeah. The emotion and the physiology is a two-way street. The physiology creates the emotion. The emotion creates the physiology. So if you can control your muscles and replicate the expression, especially the reliable muscles on the face, those are powerful. Then you can engage that emotion within seconds in order to perform an emotional role. And it's not. It is a real emotion if it's done correctly. So you might you fake it initially, but fake it till you feel it, and then it'd be very hard for anyone to distinguish my son when he's in a sad state performing from him being sad in natural life.
Yeah. Okay. And earlier on when you were talking about that, the emotions can. So there's the radar or the automatic appraisal that's always going. Find something that's important to our welfare. Then it then will run an affect program which is linked to a particular emotion, and then the awareness can kick in a bit further down the line. And one of the things that you briefly kind of touched on, which I just want to go back to, is the idea that the self-limiting effects that emotion can have. So, for example, I was chatting with somebody recently on the podcast about anxiety, and one of the conversations that we had kind of pre and off air was how sometimes they can be prone to seeing things as anxiety provoking that they're not actually anxiety provoking, but a message or something will be said or a message will be sent, and then they see it or they hear it, and then they interpret that as, oh, that's about me, or oh, that's challenging my, do you not believe me, or are you doubting me, or not, believe my credibility. So that interrupt can be about self-talk as well as not wanting to offend your grandmother, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I tend to use the word theory 1, theory 2. If there's a trigger that resembles something in your database, your emotional alert database, or something from your past that was powerful, it could be a very early script that was damaging and traumatic. And if something resembles or reminds you of that episode, it can very quickly bring on the same emotion that you'd felt at that time. And so that brings you into self-management techniques, which once you've got the awareness of self, it's then managing that emotion if it's destructive or inappropriate, which is inappropriate because of intensity, because of the emotional type, because of the duration, or because you're conducting it and playing it out in a harmful way. If any of those are at play, then it could be wise to interrupt. And one of the interrupt techniques that can be used is to develop a theory 2. So if there's something promoting anxiety, it may be scratching and picking at some rawness from history. Say I was attacked in a dark street or near an ATM machine by a guy in a black coat with black hair, and he took my money and pushed me around a little bit. It may be that I associate the trigger of men with black hair and coats with that association, and it can start my heart beating. So that needs a theory 2. Theory 1 is this guy is the same guy, and I'm going to experience the same thing. Theory 2 is there's a lot of black coats. This is another guy. So if there's a positive mindset that you can pre-program yourself with even before you go into dark streets, then that can help weaken the effects. Joe Ladoux says, once it's in, so that your friend with the anxiety, once it's in, you'll never remove it, is a neuroscientist's view, whether you accept that or not. But by using self-management techniques, you should be able to reduce the impact and effect and the speed at which you can recover.
Okay.
So that would be about understanding why am I so abnormally, inverted commas, overreacting in situations like this when most of my peers don't. And usually you can track that back to a value, like is someone not trusting? So with your friend it could be to do with trust or faith, or it could be to do with integrity, care, love. There could be all sorts of things. All sorts of value-based stuff. So if there's a powerful value-based word which is brought into the frame when that trigger happens, then it'd be that will be wrapped around this perhaps a script that was maybe created in childhood, or a powerful one in adulthood.
So there were a couple of terms that you used, and I wasn't going to go to this one first, but you've just used it again, so I'll go to it, which is script. So in this context, so we talked about a script once already when we were talking about a acting script, when you were talking about your son. So in a kind of an emotion context then, what does that script mean, or what does script mean in that context?
It's a psychological term which is almost like a an autopilot, which a script or a story or a series of episodes are rammed and immersed together in a powerful way, that whenever that's triggered, this script or scenario plays out in your mind, and that can contaminate the way you perceive and deal with a different episode which is happening now.
Okay.
So it's the mistaken transfer of historical episodes to a current episode, and there's no episode can be identical.
Yeah.
But if they're similar enough, sometimes that's enough to wake up the script and say, here we go again, and that can cause an amplification, almost like you're looking through filtered glasses and you perceive the world differently than it actually is. That could save your life if it's almost exactly the same situation, but it can also interrupt constructive relationships if you let that perpetuate the way you live your life.
I remember there was a guy who I used to work with who at my first kind of big meeting, so a new enroll, I think I've been enrolled about 2 or 3 months, first big meeting where I was putting forward like what the strategy for my department would be, and this person was a important stakeholder that I hadn't engaged effectively, looking back on it now. And what happened was, in that meeting, he openly critiqued my strategy, and I felt massively undermined and massively threatened by that. But what I found for a good 6 months after was I was just angry with him. No matter, so even if he was just walking towards me in the corridor, it would just bring back all of those memories of that initial meeting. And whenever I would go and talk to him about some work we had to do together, if he ever challenged or critiqued or disagreed with anything I said, I remember disproportionately getting annoyed at him. But then later on, reflecting that what I was doing was I was pulling back on all of that first experience, because I felt massively undermined, massively challenged, and that I could have lost my credibility within a short period of time. And actually all he was doing was trying to help me be successful, because what he was saying was, here are some key issues I see with your strategy, but the mistake I'd made is I hadn't engaged him early enough. So, and he was very matter of fact, so his kind of characteristics were very matter of fact, very direct, very open. So he was just, as far as he was concerned, he was helping me, but I interpreted it as a huge threat to my credibility.
There you go. Theory 1 is he's trying to harm me, and theory 2 is perhaps he's trying to help me.
Absolutely, yeah.
And by saying this guy's got some style issues, his communication skills aren't great, but none of us are perfect.
Yeah.
But with the warts and all, I'm sure he's got a good heart, and he just wants to help me. Some people are bad guys, bad ladies, but 98% of the world are good people and do want to help. And so I guess you adopted theory 2, did you?
Yeah, I got there in the end. Something else got there in the end. And then the other term that you used was an emotion alert database. So one of the challenges I think that one of the discussion points I often have around emotion is it nature or nurture? And I say, well, it's a bit of both. And is that what the emotional database is about?
That's what most people accept and support. And this is from a lot of work done based on Darwin's work, but Paul Ekman and Sylvan Tompkins, who was Paul Ekman's mentor, have used this language that we're using now in terms of affect program and emotional alert database. So yes, many of the signals in the database we believe have evolved. And but some of them have learned, so they could be, for example, some adults are scared of the clowns from the circus, and you can understand most people being probably scared of a drop in gravity. So if the floor was to drop six inches, most people would experience fear.
Yeah.
Many people experience fear if they have a poisonous snake in proximity and it's attacking them. Fear is normal for chimpanzees, babies and humans. So those have probably evolved. But the clown in the circus, could be something, maybe a script. There's something bad happened in a circus, and the fear of the unknown. We like things that are comfortable and known. And this unknown thing with a big red nose making loud noises, he was only trying to or she was trying to entertain us.
Yeah.
But that could have gone into some child's emotional alert database that, be careful, this is a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
And almost that can then become a phobia, no matter how much reassurance from parents or even therapy. The sign of a clown that's made up can trigger that database. And it's like a fish trap. This is Joel Ladoux again. He says it's almost like a lobster pot. Once that's in, it's very, very, very difficult, even with all the support and therapy and psychiatric help to pull that out. So that would be a learned trigger rather than an evolved trigger.
Yeah.
Or association. And it doesn't have to be exact. It can just resemble. It's something that resembles a clown could be enough to trigger that emotion again.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about, and we didn't language it in this way, but we talked about that self-awareness. I suppose, no, you did say self-awareness. So we talked about self-awareness. And then we've also got, in the classic kind of Goleman 2x2 grid, you've got the awareness, self-awareness, then self-management, and then awareness of others and other management, for want of a better phrase. And I guess that's probably the most common model or framework around emotional intelligence. But one of the challenges I guess I have with that term, with that 2x2 and the term emotional intelligence in general, is it's those two words make up, and my listeners can't see how wide my arms are going, but those two words, emotional intelligence, make up this massive kind of variety and breadth and depth of stuff that's all been kind of pulled together in a 2x2. So what's your working definition of emotional intelligence, if you have one?
It's you probably capture it with what you've just said there by describing the 2x2 grid. So whether it's Jack Mayer or Peter Salovey, who did a lot of work with Caruso on the Mesquite model, which your listeners may have heard of. So they worked hard on an ability model, and they had the 4-branch model. And then you described Daniel Goleman, who did a lot of work publishing and making bringing this into the public arena around the 2x2 matrix of self-awareness, self-management, being aware of others and managing the interaction with them. So if you incorporate those 4 corners of that 2x2 grid into a sentence, you're not far off a definition that most people would accept.
Yeah.
However, many of the definitions are not comprehensive enough because I know this is dear to your heart as well. Because to judge competence, whether you take the ability framework or the trait descriptors, we can come to that later, if you're judging the emotional intelligence of an individual, then I would suggest that's impossible unless you can get to a decision on the appropriateness of their behaviour or thinking in context and with a goal. So unless you know their goal, if you've not got information about the context, them, the other, what's going on around them, where they come from, their culture, their background, and the other persons, unless you know the intricacies of the micro context of the interaction that they're exchanging, say, having a discussion or a disagreement in, and if you don't know the macro context about their values and beliefs and their culture, and from what they might be bringing to the table in their rucksack, their invisible rucksack, then if you've not got any way of ascertaining and bringing that into the table to judge whether someone is behaving appropriately, you'll be guessing. So that's what the challenge for assessing emotional intelligence is. First of all, you need a framework that respects culture and brings culture into play and the wider issues, which we just call context. Nothing happens in a vacuum.
Absolutely.
And context must feature. Now, unfortunately, there are about 6 or 7 popular models now with assessment tools around for emotional intelligence. Many of them neglect the context.
Yep.
And many of them also don't respect goals. What's the goal of the interaction? So my goal with you isn't always pro-social. If I'm a poker player, I want to beat you. I don't care if you're hurting and you lose money. Now that would hurt, that phrase would cause concern to some. And therefore that brings another thing into which is a problem for the models, is they're contaminated with value-laden or role-laden aspects. So Daniel Goleman was designed for leadership.
Yeah.
If I want emotional intelligence for me and my wife, then there's no leadership there. We're equals. Well, I would say that. My wife Ellen might say she's the boss. But leadership is a contaminant. If we want a pure generic model, if we're striving for the equivalent of an IQ model, which is generic and widely applicable, then we need an EQ model which has got the same clarity. And even, and this is not going to be popular, even if the intent of the model is not pro-social and to do with well-being. So many of the models have criteria in them that are driven towards everyone feeling happy and good and working together and constructive and cooperative. And in poker and big business, sometimes if I'm Pepsi and you're Coke, my job is to beat you, and that's the mission statement of Pepsi, to beat Coke. So I want to beat you, not physically, but competitively in a fair way on the market, to protect the employees that have given their lives to our company, because that's my duty and responsibility, and to serve our customers. Hopefully without being destructive and damaging to any of our competitors, but competitive business, everyone wants 60% market share. 3 companies can't have that.
Okay. So earlier on you talked about Salavi, Mayer and Caruso, and then you talked about Goleman, and looked at both of those in terms of ways of potentially trying to assess somebody's emotional quotient, or to assess someone's emotional intelligence. So for the listener that might not be familiar with each of those approaches, do you want to give us a bit more of what's a synopsis of the Salavi, Mayer, Caruso work, and then you did a little bit about Goleman, so is there anything else you'd want to add around that? Just give us a synopsis of both, so that before we I know we want to unpick them, but just before we unpick them.
This it probably would help those new to this field to visualise 3 models or 3 types of model, or 2 and a hybrid. You've got one which is ability. That's the based heavily on the word intelligence. Intelligence is defined in the dictionary about the ability to acquire and apply knowledge.
Okay.
So if you need to acquire and apply knowledge, then when you think of IQ tests, it's your ability to reason with numbers, reason with numerical, verbal reasoning, spatial ability.
Yeah.
So you get given tests, and there's right and wrong answers decided by either the science, the theory, or the experts.
Okay.
There is a series of right and wrong answers,
yeah.
And therefore you accept that these qualities of these 13 assessment tools or 8 assessment tools cover the factors, is the word that the researchers use. They cover the factors which together make up the construct of IQ.
Okay.
So it might be separate tests, it might be an integrated test, but they are tests in the word that we would understand them.
That have right and wrong answers and so on.
Yeah, almost like more like maths and physics rather than doing an essay for English.
Yeah.
So there's right and wrong answers, and they can be marked by a computer almost if you take IQ. So those are ability based. Some people use the word competence, and competence is having the knowledge, understanding and skill and ability to do something. Mm-hmm. So you need the underpinning knowledge and understanding to transfer that ability to different contexts. So good competence models will have a solid knowledge base, understanding base,
yep.
to allow transfer of knowledge, and then that skill, be able to apply that in a specific context and then transfer that performance to a range of contexts when you're under pressure. So an aircraft pilot may learn in the classroom first about the theory of the clocks and the altitude and the weather. Then they'll go into a flight simulator to develop the skill. But in the end, they'll be then tested in that flight simulator and then as a co-pilot with 246 real breathing humans at the back of them. Because you can't rely on people performing in a simulator and then being let loose to captain a plane.
Okay. Because
we've changed the context. We've now got breathing bodies in the back of the car, in the back of the plane, and the individual pilot could lose it and not be able to cope with that pressure. So we need to test them in pressurised situations. That's one of the big weaknesses in current assessment tools to do with ability. The stakes are low. They're simplistic, theoretical. Context is often ignored, and the reliability then of using the score in that simulator, whatever that assessment session involves, the reliability of that being a predictive score that this person can perform in high-stake individual situations is maybe questioned.
Okay.
So that's the ability stream. You then have a trait, a camp of trait believers and advocates. Trait is, another word for trait is maybe personality. So it's words that are used to describe people, so optimistic, pessimistic, introvert. There are many psychometric instruments on the market that cover trait personality constructs. And those are largely assessed by self-report. So you'll have a questionnaire describing, it'll give you 4 words or it'll give you a couple of scenarios, and then you'll describe, if this was me, if I was there, then I would likely do this. And so you're self-reporting against a framework of traits or personality descriptors.
Yeah.
So then you have in the middle, which is Daniel Goleman's in here. In fact, most of the other models, apart from Mosquito, are in the middle. There's very few pure trait models.
Yep.
Most of them are mixed. What mixed means is there's a mix of competencies, traits, personalities, and qualities. So some of those models in the middle would have statements like customer orientation. No, that's an attitude. Others will have empathy. Now, empathy is a skill. It's a skill. You need knowledge and understanding and a skill to do empathy. Empathic falls onto a trait, but the word used in many models is empathy. So they'll mix it with a skill. So you've got a quality, which is an attitude, and then optimistic, which is a trait. So you've got a trait, a attitude, and a skill, and others have knowledge. Your ability to label your emotion.
Okay.
That's knowledge. That's theory. So to put a word against a group of sensations in your body, that's a skill, but you need the knowledge first of the word. That's why. EI, emotional intelligence, is hard to assess in a 1-year-old because the emotional labels are the emotions themselves. So the sensations and the feelings, we give labels to them, and so when we feel joyous, we call it happy. And joyous, even, is not a word a baby would manage, but it's the elatiness, the warmth, the pleasant sensations. And then we attach these labels, and we call those words emotion, but they're just words. And right now we're using English words. Some languages don't have exact replicas, so we've got to be careful with languages. So you've got your trait, your ability, and mixed. And then to complicate matters further, and I just feel so sorry for the human resources manager who's been tasked to, can you bring an emotional intelligence tool into the company or the organisation? Because first of all, you have this array of models, and all of them have the problems. Even the authors and the scientists who develop them criticise their own models. Nobody's happy that we've got an emotional intelligence competence framework and assessment diagnostic tool that goes with it that's good enough yet. And those from the right camp, the trait camp, will criticise the ability, and the ability will criticise the trait. And there's many, the other challenge for those who are trying to buy or select a model is you've got to work out the commercial interests, because many of the model designers will then work with a company to construct an instrument to measure it, and then they get signed into non-disclosures, and you must protect and defend and never criticise your own work. No, scientists must criticise their own work, but if you start to criticise a tool you have a stake in, then that can get interesting. So it's a fabulously fascinating arena where you've got about well, there's maybe 100 really good researchers focusing just on this, with many scientific papers being produced, picking holes and challenging and trying to find this panacea, trying to find the holy grail of what's the model.
And it is, and I guess this is a bit of a loaded question. Well, it's not a bit of a loaded question, it is a loaded question. Is there a need for a panacea? Is there a need for an agreed model, or a model of assessment at least? If
you're looking at some form of benchmark that can survive cultural global differences and be used as a fair instrument for selection, team building, recruitment, and so on, then like IQ, we've probably got something there for IQ now that most people accept is okay for screening children into private schools, or for screening people into employment. So the IQ is seen to be the differentiator. If we want to try and recruit someone that's got a reliable chance of succeeding in this pathway, whether it be in education or career, then is there a way that we don't want to make mistakes after 2 years? It's expensive to recruit a CEO and then release them after 6 months or 2 years because they can't do the job, they're not competent. So if we want a predictive instrument that can guarantee success in whatever arena, in marriage, volunteer work, politics, teaching, leadership, negotiation, police, security. If we want to try and predict, apart from just the knowledge base and the academic ability, their ability to deal with emotions of themselves and others, then we've got to try and help provide a tool to do that. And currently we don't have one. I retired from my day job 10 years ago when I was 49 to try and find that tool. And I spent 6 years without success, and now I've had to try and contribute a little bit towards that myself. So because I'm frustrated at the lack of a model which is scientifically validated. Most of these are theories. Most are theories. And they're adapted and changed. One day it's 18 competencies, then we didn't like 2, so we changed it. It's now 16 and 21. So they changed on the fly without empirical research. And if people are going to use those to train, say, high-stake situations like soldiers fighting in the high-stake environments, if those are going to be used for selection and support and development, they've got to be able to be trusted. And so I worry at the reliability of the current frameworks.
So I'm going to go a little bit philosophical for a moment. So when you talked about the ability to predict, then, or the maybe a desire or a want to predict, comparing IQ and EQ, or looking for an assessment approach that is similar across those two, is that an ecologically valid way to go? So I guess maybe, and I said I'm getting a bit philosophical. So is intelligence fixed? So whether that be emotional intelligence or cognitive ability, are those things fixed? And in which case, then, what does an assessment give you? It gives you a moment in time interpretation of where somebody is, either cognitive ability or emotion ability wise. But can either of those or both of those be developed over time? So I'm not really sure what my question is, if I'm honest. I think I've just said what's in my head.
I think where you're going it's a nice track, because the IQ tests for a 7-year-old are different from an IQ test for an 18-year-old. And because the IQ measure is a ratio of their ability against their age.
Okay.
So if you take the IQ measure, if I'm 100, it means I'm like the average intelligence of my age. So I'm either over or under that in terms of it's almost norm-based. But you've got the right wrong answer system in the centre. So if you're taking the claim that your IQ is fixed, so it's a straight line graph between your intelligence and ability to answer these tests will stay the same. You won't suddenly increase it or decrease it. is based on the thinking that that your ability is not fixed. It's not that your knowledge and understanding sticks as a six-year-old. It just progresses on a straight line graph.
Okay.
So you're born with it. You're born with that ability, and no matter what people do to you, you can't be changed on that line. Is what many people accept.
Okay.
I challenge that. I'm not convinced because the IQ is based on academic scholastic intelligence. Howard Gardner has multiple intelligences, and the academic element of that is only 2-3 parts. So for someone to be to predict whether someone can succeed in life, work, social relationships, or whatever it's being used for, from testing a small percentage of their ability across a range, if you take Howard Gardner, worries me, and it's been hijacked. IQ has been hijacked by the school and the university system.
Yep.
And that worries me that we're creating swollen heads at the cost of big hearts. So
that's a nice.
You like that one?
I like that one.
Yeah.
That was good.
So I value academic intelligence, even though the word academic itself means of no practical use. I still value academic academic intelligence. Because the discipline and the framework and the processes that it encourages you to go through with your thinking can give you great results. So you've got the academic, and I'm not just going to say it's academic and emotional is the one. If I'm the best footballer in the world, I may not be very good at school and maths and verbal reasoning, numerical reasoning, but I'm really good at my sport, or an artist, and so I'm successful in my chosen pathway.
Yep.
If I'm a volunteer, if I just choose to help others all my life in a volunteer business, then I don't need an IQ test to tell me that I can do that.
Yeah.
So I think it's we need to move over IQ. There's room for some more, and we need to challenge that pole position that perpetuates the scholastic system from academia and learning into becoming teachers, because it's a pathway which I think is isolating. And I would rather see a range of qualities assessed and taught in schools. And one of my passions and goals is to at least do my bit with the emotional intelligence. Other people will handle sports and manual dexterity, but to bring the emotional intelligence into 4-year-olds and 9-year-olds. So reading, writing, arithmetic is fine, but emotional skill and competence deserves a place for the 4-year-old. And until we get a model that's robust enough and tested with adults, we daren't bring anything into schools. It's been tested and piloted. There's a program called social emotional learning, social emotional aspects of learning across America and the UK.
Yeah.
But that's just a adaptation of competency frameworks that were developed for leaders. It's a force fit. So we need a generic core model that can fit for a 4-year-old. Well, first we need the adult model. Then we need to see how does that need to be changed. Because if that's accepted as a benchmark for adults, then the subset of that needs to be how can we then develop a framework that can help us track and benchmark individuals so that we can design interventions which can help them deal with their own emotions and the emotions of others in an early stages, because that's a life skill.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we can get that life skill in early on, we need to make sure that the framework and the tools we're using are reliable. And I daren't move into I've been a governor for 25 years with a primary school, and they're begging me to get this in, and I daren't move in until we've got the validation of the models we're currently working on to take them into 4-year-olds. It would be irresponsible. But right now they're getting very little.
Yeah. So at my children's school, my son, he's in reception now, and as much as I don't like it, they're currently working on what they call red thoughts and green thoughts. So red thoughts being kind of put in those negative camp, and green thoughts being put in the positive camp. And I don't like the framing of that as red and green thoughts. But anyway, before I won't digress into that. But I agree with you. There is so much more that can be done. You know, if that's the best we can do right now, come on, we've got to be able to do better than that. Surely.
Yeah.
Surely.
It's so basic. I mean, there was some. It's a step forward, I guess. It's better than nothing, maybe. But I have the same reservations you have when you say that. There's a book out now called Seeing Red. It's been out a while, and it's dealing predominantly with anger. And it's not framing it too much as negative, but it's how to handle it. And so there are some good pieces in that. So I guess if it's like if you see someone, they've had a car accident, some people are worried to intervene. Sometimes intervene with something that's partly going the right way is maybe better than doing nothing. You can't steer a stationary car, so let's get the car rolling, I guess. But I still can't bring myself to take anything into the school system right now. In 2 years I think we'll be ready, but right now I'm not ready to take anything into a school environment. We've got 20 schools, they'll expand to 200 schools with funding already in place, but we're just not right there, there yet.
Okay, so where have you got to then? So you said you're not far off. So tell me where you've got to.
Well, I think I'm one of the oldest students in Manchester now because I re-enrolled for a PhD, and so I'm now in the middle of a PhD, which is doing a critical analysis of the emotional intelligence models, leading to a generic model and an assessment methodology. So that's the focus, because I thought if no one else is going to create that, maybe I need to get my sleeves rolled up.
Yeah.
So I chose to do that under a PhD for the rigour, and again I do value the academia and the research methodology. So by going back to wrap this under a PhD gives me the chance to produce something that's going to work in as much as it can do, but also open it up to critique. So I've got the luxury of some of the people we're talking about being on an advisory board to critique the pathway of the journey, and I've got 99 subject matter experts who are standing ready to look at the right-wrong answers in terms of emotional intelligence. So once that's been validated, the model that's resulting is a result of a critical analysis of all those in place.
Okay. So identifying what the gaps are, but what the strengths are as well, and
and it's any model that comes out the other end won't be perfect, but it's got to survive the strong critiques that are coming from both camps, from the ability and the trait side and the mixed model side. So my aim is to try and handle the flaws in the existing tools as judged by the scientific community, and create a framework which is then going to describe something that could maybe become an emotional intelligence, an EQ score or an EI score that people might see as having value.
Okay. And how are you feeling about that?
It's a little bit scary because it's not easy, and there's a lot of interest in the field, but the early signs and the feedback I'm getting from the people who are advising, so I have a good supervision team, so you need that critique and challenge, but I've also got some subject matter experts and gurus, so I'm lucky to have Paul Ekman giving me feedback. There's people like Dan Soklovsky, who's pulled together a lot of work on assessing emotional intelligence. So he's mentoring the work too. So he's taking us forward. Jack Mayer has offered to help. Not on any tool because that will conflict with his own work, but support the PhD. So supporting the thinking and methodology, some of the prime movers and shakers, Mark Brackett, one of their protégés, Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer's protege, one of their prime students, is now working he's heading up emotional intelligence and doing a lot of good work. And I'm interested in his support because he's also working with children. So that's my long-term goal. So I'm very, very fortunate to have a few people on tap to help with the development in the other stages. And then there's a fabulous team of 99 people from the Emotional Intelligence Consortium, which I've recently joined, so I can access their talent, because the criteria for them as subject matter experts is something that I wanted to clarify, because that's something that's criticised with Mesquite. They had 19 experts who were from a conference that some people say, were they really experts? They were PhD students. What have they done? What have they published? Whereas the EI Consortium have got 5 criteria that they must pass to become a member.
Okay.
So it's the challenge is cleaning out that jury. And if 75% of them agree that this is an appropriate response in that context for that goal, for this person in this situational judgment test, that seems to be the way it's going. Video-based scenarios where people can see what's gone before, what's coming next, how these interrelate. Then you and I have seen how this has been done for leadership.
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of framework but used for emotional intelligence competences. Okay. And that seems to be handling most of the critique.
And that's covering off the contextual stuff then, because you can, I guess within the test you'll get told this is the wider, broader context, and then here is a video, or here is something to read or watch or to, and then is it a case of, so you've just seen that, or you've seen, here's a 10-minute video with 2 minutes in. You've got a choice now. Would you do this, or would you do that, or would you do that, or would you do that?
That's it. Yeah. Is what person A did to person B appropriate in that context, or could they handle it differently? And the judgment of the person being assessed, we know correlates very highly with their ability to transfer this into the work environment, or into the world environment. So the research is stacking up for that transfer. So the ecological validity of the assessing on the instrument needs to be good, so that we can predict that they will succeed in a generic sense. But you need to put pressure on them, so there'll be a time element. This is something we didn't experience in the leadership one, but we don't get the chance in negotiations or with a child who comes in at 2 o'clock in the morning to say, hang on a minute, can we just freeze frame for 10 minutes so I can think about how I respond here? So there needs to be one of the contextual elements, which is real life, is a time frame, because we're all emotionally intelligent when the stakes are low, and we've got 3 hours to think about it. So we've got to get the green, the amber and the red simulated in any instrument for it to have ecological validity. So how do we simulate the pressure of a military soldier under fire, or someone in a really violent discussion with their wife or husband or partner? And this could lead in divorce or separation. The stakes are high. We've got young children here. I need to handle this appropriately. What's the best thing for me to do right now if both our goals are to stay together? So if the goals are to stay together, we've just had something that's caused an eruption, then there are things you can do which can support or work against, in a constructive or destructive way, the perpetuation of that relationship.
Okay, so that covers off some of the contextual aspects. So one of the other challenges you mentioned earlier on was about cultural. So some of the tools don't take into account cultural variations. Is that something that you're planning on trying to address as well? Because the purists on the ability side say traits have no place in emotional intelligence models, and I believe they're wrong, because traits are part of the context. So a person's personality, by me knowing your personality and me knowing my preferences or traits, if you can either treat it as an ingrained, it's a genetic feature of me that I'm a let's say I'm an extrovert, let's say, and you're an introvert. Let's say that's ingrained from birth, and we believe that's the case. Then by me knowing you're an introvert and me knowing I'm an extrovert, if I want to have a constructive relationship with you, then what's the benefits of me working on that? They're threefold. One,
I need to know how I come across. That's self-awareness. Second, they can work out, is me and you a good team, or do we need a better mix of personalities for this team? But the third thing is, if I know empathically that I want to communicate with you, I need to flex my style instead of being gregarious and loud and on the table. That sometimes you need some thinking time and you process things internally. I need to give you the space for that and maybe tune my channel to your channel, and engage with you with your preferences. It's like going fishing. I like cream cakes and fish like worms. So for me to go fishing with a cream cake would be non-productive. I need to work out what the other person likes if I want to achieve my goal. So culture fits in that, and this is just I've put all this under the banner of individual differences. So psychologists agree everyone is different.
Yeah.
Now, you're unique. There's no one else in the world like you. You've got your own skill set, your own history, your own personal experiences, your own little tics and idiosyncratic behaviours, your own stories, your own sexual preferences, your culture, all that, your own language, all that is unique to you. And the more I can read that in you about how that's affecting those beliefs and values and your history affects you, the better able I am to work with you. So I've put culture in the same bag as traits, personality, preferences, life experiences, gender, age, whether you're from the city or from the farms. But I'll be careful not to pigeonhole you into any of those boxes. I hate boxes, but I'll be aware that may be biasing your habits in behaviour, emotions and thought. Yeah. So you may have some habits and shortcuts that you're taking, and I need to be aware of those to best interact with you. But where they fit, should we bring a Carl Jungian model in, or should we bring a Myers-Briggs model in, or the Big Five? I don't think so. I think it's just being aware of differences, and some knowledge and understanding of current tools and models might be valuable. But when we're face to face with an individual, all the focus should be on that person. But being aware of those differences in advance, need handling to make sure we don't bias, take shortcuts ourselves.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground in that then. So we've defined what emotions are, or what the broadly accepted kind of terms around emotions are. And then we've gone into what is emotional intelligence, how has it been defined and categorized by other people, what are some of the gaps and the issues with that, and where might that go into the future then. So are there any misconceptions or misunderstandings of emotional intelligence that you think need to be addressed?
Yeah, we've touched on some of them. I think there's probably about 5 myths and misconceptions. One is that there is one model already, and there isn't. Some people think, we just look for the emotional intelligence book and it will be based on the model, and that's not the case.
And there isn't one of those.
No,
yeah.
So there isn't one of those. And the second myth is that competences can be measured successfully by self-report. And there's good stats on this with IQ. If you ask someone to, think how ridiculous that is. If you ask an individual to...
Tell me how intelligent you think you are.
Yeah. So what's your numerical reasoning like? Can you give yourself on a scale of 0 to 10? And the correlation between self-report and IQ testing is weak. It's 0.21. So the correlation is... there is some correlation, but very low, very weak. So the idea that it can be assessed reliably is probably myth number 2. Myth number 3 is the IQ model seems to be held in high esteem. That any EQ model or emotional intelligence model can only be of value if it correlates with an IQ score. Some people will assess their own model against that as a factor.
Really?
So if my model correlates with IQ scores, it's a good one.
Okay.
And
so if somebody scores well on my model and they score well on IQ test, then that's
my model is good.
My model is good, right? Okay.
So I would challenge that. And
I think that's a load of rubbish. I nearly swore then. I can smell my podcast. I think that's a load of shit. This is my podcast.
Well, there could be no correlation. I suspect I've not seen good research on this. But I suspect there would be a good hypothesis for a PhD here to look at an inverse correlation. So in other words, the more intelligent you get, the more you know the right answers, the less interested you are in contributions from others. Maybe. I mean, some people are very good, but there's something about the arrogance that an IQ or strong knowledge can create that if not handled properly can become a liability. So if there's an inverse correlation, because the smarter you get with the swollen head, the smaller your heart gets, then if it's inverse correlation, everyone who's tested their model against IQ has been wasting the time.
Yeah.
So we don't yet know, because if you took manual dexterity, if your ability to screw a top in a bottle or kick a ball or do complicated sports or assembling, being a motor mechanic, your ability with manual dexterity, does that correlate with IQ? I don't know. I guess it wouldn't to a significant level. So why do we have to force that criteria on or that criterion on an IQ model and use it to throw it out or throw it in? So the problem is, if you're developing EQ, and this is under the third myth here, if you're developing an EQ model, what do you compare it to say it's good? You can't compare it against IQ. We've just broken that claim through. You can't compare it against existing models because they're all flawed, and even the authors accept that there's no perfect model out there yet. So what do you compare it to say it's valid and reliable? It can't be happiness because that brings in a value. So the only word I can find right now is success, however you define it. So it's success in social, family, work, leadership, education, whatever. We've got about 9 roles that people perform in life in terms of negotiation, teaching, developing, and so on. So I've got those framed to say, test it against all those 9 roles as a parent and a carer, or as an educator and a trainer. If we can predict that people who score well on this will be successful in those roles, and we test every one of them. It's going to take 5 years plus to test all of them. But once this model's in place, we need to assess about 5,000 just to get started. People across all those areas to see what the correlations are like, and we'll find out after the fact what the correlation is. So it's that's number 3.
Can I stick with that for a second? So how would you define success in that example then? So, like, what success as a teacher? Being a head teacher or pupil attainment scores? Or?
Well, exactly. So if you take what's a successful teacher, you need to make sure that is defined responsibly and ethically by not just a teacher who can get... Some people judge a good teacher as someone who can get my kid through grades. Another one says, I just want my child to be happy coming to school. Another one says, I want them to be a well-rounded human being. So you've got the customer in terms of the child, the end user of the educational system. You've got the carer or the parent who's the one who has got the power to take the child to a different school based on what their values are. And then you've got the consumer and the customer of the school, which is the high school would be the customer of the primary school. So our job as a primary school is to make our children high school ready and life ready and social. So however wide you take that, the high school in the UK system, their job is to make the children either college or university ready,
or workplace ready,
or both, and let the children decide. So create enough opportunities so they can find the gift and follow the gift, and they're not herded down. In my day, probably before your time, I was herded. Get a trade. And the schools and parents drove you to get some form of trade and craft or apprenticeship. Now it's get to university. Now you can't find a plumber in the UK who will come in less than 3 weeks, and their salaries and their value in society now is huge. They're earning much more than university professors if they're a good plumber. And so we need a spectrum of. We're not social engineers, but we've got to create a spectrum of opportunity so people can find their own craft. If they're an artist, a footballer, a motor mechanic, a teacher, a leader. So that's that again is a heck of a responsibility on those in charge of creating the pathway for children. Ken Robinson's got some great thoughts on this in terms of the creativity and the other elements that get knocked out of children from being 4 to 8. The fourth myth is about right answers without context. You cannot have right answers without context. So if there's a model that doesn't look at goals and context, then I would be suspicious. And the fifth myth is that you can ignore traits in an ability model, and I challenge that, because how can you not consider a person's preferences and habits in terms of their thinking, behaviour and emotions if you want to have a successful interaction with them.
Okay. All right. So is there anything else then? Anything else that you're thinking, feeling, want to say to bring us together and bring us to a close?
I think you've managed to plough around the main contentious issues, and I guess the key thing is to try and elevate this in thinking to psychology students, to HR, to companies, and the work you're doing I applaud in terms of taking emotional aspects into work with emotion at work, and I applaud anything that attempts to do that. I suppose I would love to see emotion at work / education schools
I've picked up my first governor role this week. I was appointed as a governor of my local primary school this week.
Bravo! It's about time you put something back in.
Yeah, I know, isn't it just? Okay, all right. There was something else that came to mind then, and then it got superseded by me talking about being a governor. What was it? I can't remember. Either way.
I know one thing that you were asking is about if any readers, any of your listeners wanted to pick up any texts.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Yeah. I've ferreted through my library, as huge as you can imagine, in the middle of a PhD, and I've been doing this now for 27 years. I've isolated 5 books, and I can give you these afterwards.
Yeah, okay.
But there's one by Annie Marie Paul called The Cult of Personality Testing.
Okay.
And that sounds a little bit negative and cheeky, but it's quite a healthy critique of personality testing, but done in a constructive way.
Okay.
So this is not to try and put people off traits, because they are valuable on personality, but I would recommend Annie Marie Paul on The Cult of Personality Testing.
Okay.
She's quite controversial. She opens up with the line of hi, nice to meet you. Let me tell you who you are.
Okay.
So it's fill in this questionnaire, give it to me, and then I'll tell you
who you are. Yeah.
And that's a flavour that is strung through the text.
Okay, so that's one.
Number 2 is I'm hoping to probably update this, so I can see a book coming out of the PhD, which is this is called A Critique of Emotional Intelligence by Kevin Murphy. And this is 12 years old, but it's underrated because I applaud the work he's done. It's not so far out of date because there's been very little development in the last 12 years. So anyone who's looking at the various models, what the problems and how can they be fixed in EQ, emotional intelligence, I'd recommend Kevin Murphy's book.
Wonderful, thank you.
Development of emotional competence is about the educational process. Now, Carolyn Sarney had 8 emotional skills. I love her work, and what she left as a legacy here in the development of emotional competence, I would highly recommend.
Okay.
And that's it's not the type of thing that will come up in Google. You have to hunt for it. But of all the books I found, this is the jewel, I would say.
Okay.
If anyone wants to look at developing emotional competence. Don Sokowski has edited and pulled together Assessing Emotional Intelligence, Theory, Research and Applications, and that's with Springer. That's a fabulous compilation, and anyone who wants to look at assessment, that is the book.
Okay.
And then finally, for those who want to go back to Ekman, Darwin, and but not be biased just by their work, I would say look at Daka Keltner and et al. He's got a group of authors he's pulled together on a book called Understanding Emotions.
Okay.
Now, they're not cheap, some of these, but I would highly recommend, if you had to buy 5 books to take on a desert island and you're as interested in emotional intelligence and assessment, those are the 5.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. We'll make sure we put links to all of those in the show notes as well. Wonderful, thank you. Anything else?
No, thank you for your time.
In which case then, thank you very much, Cliff. Thanks for being on the Emotional Work podcast, and it's been wonderful to chat with you. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Phil.
You've been listening to the Emotion at Work podcast. Written, recorded and presented by Phil Wilcox. Edited together by Simon Leverton. You can find more information at emotionatwork.co.uk or follow us on Twitter at @PhilWilcox. Thanks for listening.